everyone, welcome to another Modern Deck Tech. Today we are looking at Temur Murktide Channeler, no Delver. Yeah, I'm taking a spin on my usual Temur Tempo list and taking out Delver of Secrets and just keeping it a Dragon's Rage Channeler, and also testing out Murktide Regent, which is a recently printed card in Modern Horizons 2 that I love very, very much. It's such an awesome card. But before we dive into this deck tech, just a quick note. If you are interested in becoming a patron, check out the Patreon link in the description of this video. My Patreon is set up to make my patrons money and not me money. There's a video on my Patreon page that kind of explains it all. It's about 5 minutes long, it doesn't take too much time. But basically it's just a rewards program. So you put in money, I use that money to buy sealed product, and the rares and mythics are sent back to you. Anyway, check that out, thanks. And let's get started with the core of this deck. So normally I'm playing Delver of Secrets in my Tempo decks, and I've deck tech decks in the past where I was playing the Tempo plan, either in Temur colors or other colors, and I was omitting Delver of Secrets, but those were really just doing different things in general. Here, this is very much a Temur Delver shell, and I'm calling it Delverless Delver, yeah, because there's the 0 Delver in it. Dragon's Rage Channeler is doing a pretty good impression of Delver of Secrets, I have to admit. Now, deep down inside, and I've said this to many people, I feel that at the end of the day, the final list of Temur Delver that I'm going to settle on, and yes, it's been several weeks now where I've been showing you different types of Delver decks. I think the final list will have Dragon's Rage Channeler and Delver of Secrets both working together in the same deck, 4 of each. But here, I wanted to try it out without Delver, see how well it worked, and it's actually worked really well. Dragon's Rage Channeler, doesn't have to rely on instants and sorceries to make her flip, just has to rely on Delirium. Delirium's turned on pretty easily in this deck. The deck is made to turn on Delirium as in high percentages. And yeah, just a 3/3 flyer that has to attack in all the time, which is a minor downside. Being able to filter the top card of your library every time you cast a non-creature spell, extremely powerful. Just Dragon's Rage Channeler is a huge. I swear, if it didn't have to attack once it becomes a 3/3, if you still had the choice, I would argue it's might even be broken, borderline broken. The fact that it has to attack once this is 3/3 is a downside, a significant one, but still, it's such an awesome card. So there we go. For Tarmogoyf, of course, if we're playing Delver, if we're playing Temur Tempo, Tarmogoyf is definitely going to be a mainstay there. Nothing's going to change that. And Murktide Regent. Murktide Regent is a dragon. I'm so happy. I love dragons, and when this card was printed and its type was dragon, I'm like, fantastic. I don't care how bad it is, I want to play with it in my Temur Delver lists, and here it's not bad at all. Murktide Regent is actually a friggin' house. Even if you bring it down as like a 6/6, which I would say is probably a minimum, more of a worst case scenario, especially if it's going to be your first Murktide Regent of any particular game. Even as a 6/6 flyer that essentially dodges everything except hard removal, like Dreadbore or something like that, or Path to Exile. Yeah, just a huge 6/6 flyer in the air that actually gets bigger the next time you get rid of instants and sorceries in your graveyard. Yeah, it's just a finisher. I love this card. I am playing it as a 4 of. I think it's a little much, but this is a Murktide oriented deck, even though I'm not playing Thought Scour. I'll get to that in a second. So I am playing a 4 of here, which is a lot. I mean, normally I would probably play, let's say, Hooting Mandrills in this slot. Instead of Dragon's Rage Channeler, we're playing Delver of Secrets. But hey, it's a new meta, it's a new world for Modern, and this is the core of this deck. So check that out, snapshot it. Let's get on to the Cantrip. So 4 Serum Visions, that's nothing crazy here. I'm a big pusher for Abundant Harvest. Really love Abundant Harvest. Yes, there is a world where Abundant Harvest and Traverse the Elvenwald work together in decks like this, where Delirium is kind of like a central point of the deck, but I'll be getting to that in the next deck tech, not this one. But I'm playing 4 Abundant Harvests here. I'm playing 2 Expressive Iteration. I think 2 is a decent number considering the other card types that we want to be playing in this deck. And 3 Mishra's Baubles, because I am playing a 17th land. Tried to go down to 16, it's not enough, so the only card I was willing to cut was Mishra's Bauble here, so we're playing 3 Mishra's Bauble, which is perfectly fine, to help you draw into more cards and also feed your Delirium as quickly as possible. Actually, before moving forward, I just want to talk about Thought Scour for a second. Now, I've always had a hate kind of love relationship with Thought Scour, because it's just not really an optimal card. Now, we used to run 4 of when we used to do Hooting Mandrills, And that's mostly to increase the percentages of having Hooting Mandrills live turn 2 with potentially Stubborn Denial mana up. That was always a very strong, powerful play in Temur Delver. That's, almost unbeatable. And if you have Force of Negation or Disrupting Shoal to back you up, then the game is already yours by turn 2 in most situations. But realistically speaking, Thought Scour was just bad, and it was kind of like we kind of have to play it if we want to be optimal. Now with Murktide, we're not realistically trying to cast Murktide turn 2. This is maybe a turn 3 if you want to do it safely, and more like a turn 4. So it's a mid to late game threat anyway. So I'm not really rushing to get it out onto the battlefield. I don't see myself being able to cast it turn 2, and Thought Scour is not really going to be something I want to run, realistically speaking. Now we have DRC, which we never had before. So DRC allows you to surveil, allows you to fill up your graveyard incidentally with cards that you may not want or need. So I think that is enough to fill the graveyard to fill Murktide. And I never really had any issues playing this deck without Thought Scour in it. If you do want to run Thought Scour, like you have to, I would probably either cut Abundant Harvest or keep Abundant Harvest and maybe attack your permission package a bit. So get rid of Stubborn Denial or something. That's what I would do if you must have Thought Scour in the 75, but I don't think you need to in the Temur version. I know the UR versions are running Thought Scour, but they have more room for it to justify it. Here you're really thin on room, essentially, for cards. So that's just my 2 cents on Thought Scour. Alright, let's go on. Lightning Bolt, Tarfire, and Seal of Fire. Not playing Unholy Heat, mostly because this deck, or this deck list, is a bit more heavy on permission. And I'll be getting to the permission after this screen, but this is something I want to bring up here. I think I kind of got excited being able to justify playing Stubborn Denial, which you'll see in the next screen, and Stubborn Denial just kind of taking place of more removal. I think if you want to be playing less removal, if you want to be playing less permission and you want to play more removal, Stubborn Denial is probably going to be the card you're going to take out, and in its place probably play, Unholy Heat, which makes sense in a list like this, and so on. There's a lot of creature dependent decks in the meta right now, so removal kind of makes sense. It's going to be a meta call, it's up to you. Right now this is the removal suite that I'm playing, and I'm pretty happy about it. It's 2 less removal than my Temur Delirious Delver list that I deck tech last week, so it's not a big change, but significant enough. So the permission, as I was saying, so we're still playing 4 Force of Negation. I still think 4 Forces are perfectly fine and relevant to the current meta. Yes, there's a lot of creature-based decks, or a lot of decks that are playing super cheap artifacts that you kind of have a hard time keeping up with, but I think Force of Negation is still important to me. I don't think the meta has settled yet, so 4 Forces for now until we know better. And now I'm playing a split here, 3 each, Counterspell and Stubborn Denial. So I haven't been able to play Stubborn Denial in a long time, and that's mostly because Hooting Mandrills hasn't been a card that I've been playing for a long time. And for me to justify playing any number of Stubborn Denials, I need to have at least, 6, but ideally 8 creatures in the deck that that would have ferocious triggers enabled on Stubborn Denial at almost all times. So Tarmogoyf definitely was almost always reliable 4/5, especially in a deck like this. It's like a 5/6 or a 6/7 most of the time. So Tarmogoyf definitely is going to turn on Stubborn Denial. And like I said, Murktide Regent, even if you just exile 1 instance or sorcery in your graveyard, so it's a 4/4, which kind of sucks, which hopefully you're not doing, yeah, it would still enable ferocious triggers. So for me, that was sufficient. We're playing 8 total, so 3 Stubborn Denial kind of makes sense. Again, because of spacing and room issues, and because we have to make sure we keep turning on Delirium, I couldn't play 4 of each or 4 of one, so I just did a split between the 2, Counterspell and Stubborn Denial. I think it's fine. Stubborn Denial is just a super powerful card that doesn't get played a lot because you need enough ferocious enabling creatures, and a lot of decks don't do that. In this deck, it does, and I'm really happy to be able to play it again in the permission slot. But like I said, if you feel like you need to go a bit more heavy on removal, or you really want to play Flame Slash or Unholy Heat, well, in this deck you should be playing Unholy Heat, then cut your Stubborn Denials. I would cut all 3, let's say, bring your Counterspell count up to 4, and then play some number of Unholy Heat or whatever else you want to play. You could jumble around with the numbers here, but this is the final count that I stayed with and that I was happy with. The lands, so nothing crazy here about the lands. Nothing has changed from recent Delver lists, and in fact, actually nothing has changed. All the numbers are still the same: 4 Misty, 4 Scalding, 2 Wooded, then 2 Breeding Pools, which was a recent change in the past month or so, 2 Steam Vents and 1 Stomping Ground, and then you have a Forest and an Island. Forest is still the worst card in your deck, but I still I still believe that it is important to have at least one of in your 60. So it's there. If you really don't like Forest, remove it. Put a Botanical Sanctum or something. It's your call. Very rarely will it be the only land in your opener, in which case you're almost always going to be, mulliganing, unless you have Abundant Harvest in your opening hand as well, because then it works perfectly fine. But yeah, I mean, I strongly recommend you keep it there. It's a nice way to fetch for, green and not, take too much damage. Or for whatever reason, working around Blood Moon, just having extra basics for targets for Field of Ruin, Ghost Quarter, whatever it may be. So that's my case. The sideboard, pretty similar sideboard still. I mean, my sideboards are stabilizing now. In the past few deck techs, I've warned you that sideboards are really just kind of in a mess because the meta is kind of in a mess, but things are kind of settling. I'm still playing 2 Engineer Explosives. I really think that if you're playing a 3-color deck or 3+ color deck, EE is really important sideboard tech, really useful to getting rid of either a bunch of tokens, if you're really worried about tokens, or essentially any permanent that's 0 to 3 converted mana cost. That's really what you're targeting here, and is really useful. So it's very versatile. It could target any types of permanents in many matchups, and I think the 2 of them make sense here. 3 Grafdigger's Cage, so you could probably replace some number of these with Endurance, which is proving to be better and better, and there's enough green targets in this deck, I think, to justify Endurance, at least in some number. So yeah, just keep that in mind. I played with 3 Grafdigger's Cages with this list, but you could putz around and add 1 or 2 Endurance instead. It's your call. Alpine Moon, 3 of, obviously taking the place of Blood Moon. Then we have 3 Veil of Summer, which, Veil of Summer, one of the main reasons you're splashing green, honestly, apart from Tarmogoyf. And then you have 2 Destructive Revelry, which is my new, or going back to my old favorite, Artifact and Enchantment Hate, which also deals 2 damage to that, to whatever enchantment artifact owner's, life total, which is great. And you have 2 Huntmaster. Yeah, no Clothis. I was always on the Huntmaster train. I love Huntmaster of the Fells. I really, 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 really love this card, and it's been working great for me. In a deck with Abundant Harvest, you're often hitting 4+ lands anyway. I mean, it's not hard if you need to hit a 4th. And Huntmaster of the Fells just helps you close out games. It is a must-answer creature. All your creatures have to be must-answers. Huntmaster is a must-answer. If your opponent is not answering it, it's either because they've already beat you and it's over, or because it's over for them. It's just really one or the other. The game is not going to go much longer after Huntmaster resolves and you're able to flip it once or twice. So there is the sideboard. Okay, so the matchups. Alright, so Living End is a thing again. Living End is proving to be a mainstay now, which is fine. It's understandable. It's expected with Shardless Agent and other cards being printed that kind of, favor Living End decks. Generally speaking, this is not too concerning, alright? You let the Cascade resolve. You let Cascade resolve. You don't really have a choice. And then you counter Living End. So you're going to want Force of Negations in your hand. You're going to want Stubborn Denial, ideally. Or if you just have open mana for Counterspell. Or you have a bunch. So you have some redundancy, in case they bring in Veil of Summer and decide. I'm not too concerned about spell-based combo. Same thing goes for Storm. So same thing there. You have a lot of removal for their creatures that help them accelerate their spells. And you have Force of Negation for Gifts Ungiven, for example. That's really a key spell you want to target. In the sideboard, you have Grafdigger's Cages or Endurances or whatever to screw on with their graveyards, and that's also true for Living End, by the way, so keep that in mind. You have a lot of tools for these types of combo decks, so I'm not too concerned. Primetime decks, you can use Alpine Moon out of the side to turn off Valakut or whatever, value land that you want to turn off, and, I think you have enough tools in general to slow things down and take them out. It is going to be a bit tough, but I think you can, especially if they're playing the Amulet version, you have Artifact Hate as well. They can help you take out their Amulet of Vigor, I believe is the name, or whatever it's called, Amulet, and win those games. I'm usually not too concerned. It is a race. Yes, sometimes they'll beat you. Fine, it's annoying when they do, but you can handle it. Aggro decks, okay. Well, you are playing slightly more removal. than usual. And like I said when I was going through all the permission and removal spells, if you feel like you're going to be playing a lot more creature-based decks and a lot less spell-based decks, or a lot less decks where Force and Negation or even Stubborn Denial might be overkill, that's when you want to swap out some number of Stubborn Denials or all of them and add more removal, go up to 10. But even at 8 removal, that's a lot of removal in the main to take out, very important creatures early on, whether it's in the Blitz decks, especially in the Merfolk decks. Let me tell you, Merfolk really got some huge upgrades. I'm not sure where Merfolk is going to stand when all the dust settles, but I'm super impressed by the new Merfolk decks. You really got to get, you got to have everything properly aligned there, and make sure you take out their lords and anticipate their lords, especially when they have Aether Vial in play. And yeah, it's a tough game. Game 1, games 2 and games 3 get slightly easier, but again, aggro decks you can deal with. You just have to lean really heavy on the removal and sideboard accordingly. And like I said, adjust for the meta. That's what you have to do with all decks. No deck you can just pick up and play in any meta. That just doesn't work. Control. Okay, well, this is one place where having a lot of permission does help, because control decks can cause a lot of grief. Generally speaking, I don't mind. Control decks that have black in them are the ones that I fear the most, because dealing with counter spells is okay, you could work around them. My main concerns are usually efficient black removal. That's really the main pains here, and when you couple that with black discard, that could, cause a lot of headaches, but nothing much. But that's always been the case. I think with a heavy permission package at least having removal and permission properly balanced in this deck, you can work around most of the stuff they're going to throw at you. Inquisition of Kozilek, for example, can't hit Murktide. Fatal Push can't hit Murktide. A lot of their removals actually don't deal a Murktide region. I know they're going to be working around that now as the meta adjusts, but this is something that is to your advantage. So they take out your Channeler okay, they take out your Goyf okay. Eventually you're going to be able to resolve your Murktide region, and then they're going to have a lot of issues dealing with it, especially if they don't have white. So this is where you can, gain some pretty easy wins, or at least well-fought wins. I've played plenty of control decks with this list, and I was relatively comfortable in all of them. The ones where I lost were the ones where they just had the nuts. They had all the Inquisitions they needed, all the Fatal Pushes they needed early on, and it just locked me out. Control is going to win sometimes. That's why people play control. But I think it is a matchup you can handle pretty well if you're comfortable with this deck and playing against control decks and not just going all out and, fully committing to the board all the time. Mid-range decks, where I've also moved Stoneblade under, because I feel like I needed to put Stoneblade somewhere, and Stormforge Mystic shows up in mostly mid-range decks, but also a lot of control decks, so I don't know where it's supposed to land, but I wanted to put it only once on this screen, so I put it in the mid-range decks. If you're playing a Stoneblade deck that's mostly mid-range, you do have a lot of removal to get rid of Stoneforge turn 2 ideally, in which case they're not going to get their early Batterskull or whatever, their Cauldra, that other artifact that's come down. Keep in mind that new artifact that's come down, that was recently released, is indestructible, so if you have the chance to counter it. Don't wait for it to resolve and then get cute with your Destructive Revelry or whatever. It's not going to work. Just keep that in mind. Engineered Explosives will also be useful coming out from the side to deal with the Germ tokens. Take them out. Keep that in mind. I think mid-range matchups in general with a list like this have gotten mostly better, believe it or not. Delver of Secrets was a card that was often going to be hit, and it didn't give you too much value, at least off of Dragon's Rage Channeler or DRC. You can get some value out of DRC before it bites the dust, it bites the bullet of Fatal Push or whatever. And if you could protect it successfully, then it's going to continue to provide you value over and over and over and over again with that Surveil, which is going to be really important, because especially against mid-range decks, which often splash black, which often have a lot of discard, they're going to be stripping your hand early on. So if they don't strip DRC for whatever reason, which I think is a mistake, or if you manage to make DRC stick to the board, you don't want to have a lot of dead draws. Let's say they took out all your value cards and just left you with lands. You don't want to draw any more lands. That's a big problem. So having Surveil there is going to be really important. Helps you grind a bit better early to mid game. And then, of course, late game, Murktide region comes down, and a lot of those decks don't know what to do. They just can't deal with it. They don't have the proper tools. Now, if you're playing a Stoneblade deck, they do have white, so odds are they have some number of Path to Exiles. But hopefully you have some protection up as well. You have Stubborn Denial, keep that in mind. You have Force of Negation as well, and Counterspell. So you have a decent package. This is what I was trying to present with my Murktide list. It's a balanced package between removal and permission to kind of help you win out the game in most situations. That's what it is. I think the mid-range matchup overall, at least in my opinion, hasn't gotten worse. It's gotten slightly better because Murktide dodges so much. So I'm pretty confident with it. Again, if you don't have the right cards early on, I mean, that's just how Tempo is. I don't know what else to explain to you. Tron. Well, I kind of put Tron in its own category. This is usually what I used to call big mana decks, but honestly, big mana decks are almost exclusively Tron at this point. Depending on where the meta goes, I might change this category a bit. But for now, Tron is Tron. It comes in different flavors. I still think it's a relatively good matchup. The matchup has gotten better over the years as we've had a few more tools printed in our favor. Alpine Moon still does its work. The fact that Alpine Moon is 1 mana and you can get it out turn 1 is actually pretty good. And you don't have to worry about Blood Moon and getting the right amount of lands before you make Blood Moon stick. So Alpine Moon is actually pretty great. It is going to be easier for them to blast zone it though. But, I mean, it is what it is. I mean, you either get it or you don't get it. But Alpine Moon will definitely help you out here. Believe it or not, Destructive Revelry might help you out as well, depending on what variant of Tron they're playing. So a lot of sideboard tech can come in and help you out, but in the main, you have a lot of tools again at your disposal, especially with Force of Negation and Stubborn Denial and Counterspell, you know, now replacing Mana Leak. You have a lot of play against Tron, so I think the matchup is just is relatively good. I don't think it's easy. I think it's relatively good right now, so kind of happy about my matchups of Tron, because this used to be a big issue for Tempo players 3, 4, 5 years ago. Last but not least, my most hated category, Borderline Magic. If you find yourself playing against a Borderline Magic deck, I don't know, cross your fingers, say a little prayer if that's your thing, because that's basically what's going to happen. Now, if you're playing against Dredge, I literally don't have much more I can offer you. You know, the main deck, fine, has a lot of removal, which is great, has your big threats if you can make them stick early on, but Dredge can just be explosive and have stupid plays turn 2 where you can't do anything and you can't really interact with them. Force of Negation can come in handy if you're gonna counter their Life from the Loam, which is very important, by the way. That slows them down a lot if you manage to counter their Life from the Loam, so keep that in mind. Or their Conflagrate or whatever it is. Those are key spells that you can counter. If you manage to counter spell their Ox, whatever that freaking Ox is called, that's great, because that empties out their graveyard quite a bit, and if you counter it, it's almost always GG. But again, it really depends on what other stupid stuff they've done before trying to resolve that Ox. It's really it's a hit or miss. I can't say much. If you manage to get Grafdigger's Cage, or Endurance even, but Grafdigger's Cage is better, from the sideboard and make it stick turn 1 or turn 2, and they can't deal with it, or you could protect it, it's GG. So there you go, you could beat them that way. If you're playing against mill decks, well, I don't know, mill decks, if they have the nuts, it's over. But generally speaking, the longer the game goes and the more control you have over mill decks, the better your chances of winning. I didn't know how I wanted to phrase that in my head. It was clear in my head. My mouth didn't agree. But generally speaking, mill mostly annoys me because that's one of the main reasons why Dredge annoys me. They do a lot of things super quick, super early, and they give you very little chance to even interact with them. Not as bad as Dredge, I give them that much, which is why mill I worry about less. You have a lot of removal to take care of their crabs and whatever early on, and you could Force of Negation any of the artifacts you're trying to count or trying to resolve, or even Glimpse the Unthinkable is a great target. So you have a lot more playing against mill, but for me, still a Borderline Magic deck. And then Lantern is there because, whatever, Lantern is there to signify all the rest. All the other decks that play, annoying cards that stop you from doing anything, including Ensnaring Bridge, which is my most hated card in Magic. So that's what I have to say about Borderline. I think that was more of a rant against Borderline Magic than what this deck does against them. But again, I think you have decent tools to cover most of these decks. And that is it for Temur Murktide Channeler, me and my creative deck names. I really enjoyed playing this list. I think playing this list over the past few weeks has given me a better idea of where the value of all these cards are going to be when I get my final, let's say, top favorite list of Temur Delver, where it's going to, whatever that list ends up looking like. I'll have that in a month or so. But right now, as always, especially when it comes to Delver decks, Tempo decks, or just Tempo decks in general, I like to explore many variants. That's what I've been doing the past several weeks. That's what I'm doing again this week. I'm going to do that again next coming weeks. I know you all enjoy it, which is great. And then after that, I'll be moving on to different types of decks for a while. But it's really important to try all the different variants so you get to see how different cards play, how they work together, how they don't work together. That's really important for me as a brewer and just a lover and player of Modern, player of Magic. And hopefully that gives you a bit more insight, some useful tools. This deck might either convince you to play Murktide Region, or this deck might convince you that Murktide Region is not worth it. I mean, either way, I think that's great. Whatever helps you decide on what you want to play, I'm happy I was able to do that for you. Let me know in the comment section down below what you think about this deck. There'll be 4 matches going up today instead of the usual 3, so stay tuned for that. Yeah, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. Enjoy my content in general. Please subscribe, hit notification bell. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, share my content on social media. Watch my content start to finish. All that stuff really helps me out a lot. It really, really does. Helps with all the algorithms out there. If you want to go a bit step further, like I mentioned at the beginning of this video, join me on Patreon. There's a link in the description of the video. There's a quick 5-6 minute video on the Patreon page that explains Patreon rewards. I'm telling you, the $5 or so that you're able to scrape by, if you could afford it, only if you could afford it. The $5 you could give a month to Patreon goes directly to sealed product. I buy that sealed product, I open it on screen. All the non-bulk rares and mythics go into the Patreon rewards vault, and then all the rest goes into giveaways that I do anyway. You get Patreon rewards at the end of every year, 1 rare or mythic for every month you've been a patron, up to 24 months in succession. So if every non-bulk rare mythic is between $3 and $15, well, guess what? That's, you know, you're making way more than what you're putting in. That's the goal for a lot of you, or at the very least you're breaking even. That would be ideal. That would be fantastic for me. If you get even more, great. Check it out. Thanks, and have a good one.